Okay, let me go through a couple of examples just so that you can see it working out in an actual verse. This is a portion of Jonah 1, verse 7, that you'll translate next week. So you may want to pay careful attention. And in this verse, you have, I believe, one of the vocab words for, I think it's this week, if not perhaps next week, but nafal, which we just talked about. Now, one of the unique things about this verse is that it has one root, but it appears in two different verb stems. Okay? And you can see the difference in vocal pattern appearing in each of the different words, both in the Vav consecutive, and both have this nun that falls off and assimilates. So here we start with vayapilu. Okay, so you see the Vav followed by a patach with a prefix with a dagesh forte in it. You know exactly what you're dealing with. That's a mesaper, or a Vav consecutive. That's the Vav consecutive form. Vav, patach, prefix with a dagesh forte. Okay? So you know you have a verb, and you know it's in the Vav consecutive. Therefore, you know it's an imperfect form. And you see that the prefix is a yod, so you know it's a third person, either third person masculine, either singular or plural. You see the shurik vav on the end, and so you know it's a plural. Okay, so we have third masculine plural, imperfect, vav consecutive. Now we have to identify the vocal pattern and the root. Okay, so our root is visible, pe and lamed, but we see this dagesh forte, of course, so now we know nun, pe, lamed. Now, what's the vocal pattern? So under the prefix is a patach, and the patach under the prefix is the sign of the hifil imperfect. Okay, so patach under the prefix followed by a hirik between the second and third root letter. That's a hifil imperfect. Now, because this is both a vav consecutive and a plural imperfect that has a prefix complement, the vocal pattern of the verb has been constricted or contracted. So you don't have the full hirik yod, but you still have the same sound created. Okay, it looks a little different, but it's the same sound. Vayapilu. Vayapilu. Okay, so this is a hifil of to fall, to cause to fall, or to drop. Or in context, we'll find out something slightly different. So, and they caused to drop. What's the subject? What's being caused to drop? Goralot. Goralot, which are lots. Okay? Or dice. That's the idea. They're casting lots, right? So that's the contextual translation of cause to drop. They cast lots. Vayipol. So again, we have vav followed by patach, prefix with a dagesh forte. Another vav consecutive, imperfect. The prefix vowel is a hirik, so we're thinking either most likely pa'al or possibly nifal. But none of the rest. Nifal would be EAA, and we don't have anything else down here. We don't have extra syllables. All we have is a holum, and the holum between the second and third root letter is pa'al, imperfect. So vayipol, and it fell. Okay, and it fell. What fell? Hagoral. Hagoral. The lot. The lot. Okay, it's the singular of this. Goralot. Hagoral. The lot fell al Jonah. Al Jonah. Upon Jonah. Okay, so here are two two different words. It's the same word, but in two different ways. Both Pe-nun, both the nuns fall off and show up in the second root letter as a Dagesh forte. Here are a few other words that begin with nun or act like they begin with nun. This one is a very unique word that is a Pe-lamed, but functions like a Pe-nun. So here, naval is an interesting word. It appears in Psalm 1. It's to wither. And in Psalm 1, it appears lo yibol. Lo, not, yibol. Right? Lo yibol. Not, it will wither. The leaves of the tree, right? The one who meditates on the Torah of the Lord day and night will be like a tree planted by streams of water. Its leaves will not wither. Alehu lo yibol. Lo yibol. Okay, so you can see that it's a pa'al, hirik, followed by a holum. Second root letter has a Dagesh forte. Okay, it's going to be the same for this one. Natan is an interesting word because it's both a Pe-nun and a lamed nun. It's got nun on both sides. So it will be ye 10. It doesn't like to do that holum here, so it'll be ye 10 in the imperfect. But in the perfect also, it will be, the initial nun will remain in the perfect because there's nothing on the other side of it to contract it or to sort of make it get claustrophobic. Here, we lose the final nun. Natata. Okay, and we still get our Dagesh forte there. So natata would be you gave. Here's our second masculine singular affix attached onto this root. The root is nun, tav, nun, natata, or natati, whatever. Looking through the textbook now on page 165, 167 actually, here are the paradigms of the Pe-nun verbs given in the perfect and then the imperfect, then on page 168 are imperative, infinitive, construct, absolute, and then participles. You will notice, looking through these, that the nun, the initial nun, doesn't fall off or disappear on any of the perfect forms. Excuse me, I'm sorry. In the pa'al it doesn't, but in the other perfect forms where you do have a vowel or, a consonant as a stem sign added, like the hifil, the hey in the beginning, or the nifal, the nun on the beginning, or the hofal, or the hitpa'al. With these, you will have the nun disappear because it gets claustrophobic like that. So, so if you look at the top of page 167, look at the hifil column. It's higish, and that the root here they're using is nun, gimel, shin. Higish, higisha, higashta, higasht, higashti, and so forth. That nun is assimilating into the gimel. Same with the nifal. Nigash, nigsha, nigashta, nigasht, nigashti. The nun of the nifal, the stem sign is the nun that's appearing there, and the nun that's a part of the root has assimilated into the gimel. Okay, and then you can see that in the imperfect forms, the nun disappears in all of them except for the nifal, because there are two nuns that are on the beginning in the nifal. So now they coalesce together, and the one assimilates into the other, doubling it, and so it's strong enough to remain. But that only happens in the Nephal. In the imperative, the nun falls off in all of them because the imperative is simply the second person imperfect form without the prefix. If you remember that, if you've completely forgotten that, go back and look at the old imperative video. But the imperative is formed by taking the second person imperfect and removing the prefix. So the nun has already assimilated in the second person imperfect form because of the addition of the prefix. And so when you take that prefix off, the nun remains assimilated. And so you have gash or ten or kach for your imperative forms. In the infinitive construct, you'll notice that there is a tav attached on the end in the first three forms in the call. In the call, for all three Pe-nun forms in the call, you have this this tav attached on the end. Geshet, tate, kachat. And it doesn't appear in the other stems. They've given you a couple of examples of the construct and absolute forms. The nun does not fall off in the absolute forms in the kal because there's nothing attached there at the beginning. And then in the participles, only the participles in which they have a mem or a nun attached in the beginning does the nun fall off, right? So you're seeing the pattern. In any verb form or verb stem in which a consonant is attached to the beginning of the word, that nun will fall off, or it will assimilate, in other words, into the next root letter, unless it's a guttural, in which case it will lengthen the previous vowel. Okay? So pay attention to these 2 pages of paradigms, read them over, look them over, compare them with the other forms, so compare column by column, going sideways. So compare all the perfect forms, compare all the imperfect forms, just look for patterns. What do you notice? What do you not notice? And that will significantly help you understand conceptually what's happening with the nun when it's the first root letter of a verb.